It sometimes seems like Jeanneau's Merry Fisher line has been around forever. But in the form of its new flagship, the 1295, we have something that feels distinctly modern. We've got a Flybridge on a 40-footer. We've got outboard engines to maximise that internal volume. And we've got a price that dips a significant margin below the £500,000 mark, including VAT. Now, there's loads to talk about on all three decks here. But what we're going to do first, given how beautiful the weather is get straight out on the water and have a little play. Now, on the face of it, you step on board this boat, take yourself to the helm, and you don't expect that much, and there are a couple of good reasons for that. In the first instance, well, we tested a Jeanneau Camarat 10.5cc a few weeks back, and that's a boat that's half the weight of this, around about 5 tonnes. This is in excess of 10 tonnes, and yet this only has 50 horsepower more with those triple F300s instead of the Camarat's twin XTO 425s. So you don't expect it to be quick, and also, of course, the nature of this flagship boat makes weight distribution quite a complex issue as well. We've got about a ton of outboards hanging over that transom. We've also got the pilot house offset to port. We've got lots of beam forward bow space, and of course we have that flybridge up top, so there's lots of weight aft, there's lots of weight up top. So again, you don't necessarily expect it to perform that well, but I've just had a little drive and it's a bit of a surprise. So I'll whack this kill cord on. We'll engage single lever again, that's the way I like to do it, and we'll get up and running. Now, we've got a few boats around, so I'll start off very gently and get ourselves away from those. Now, with those triple F300s, the pickup is quite remarkable. I'll just straighten her up and we'll put the throttles down. Okay, and off we go. Now, there's only a little bit of bow lift. We're planing, we're passing 21 knots already in about 2.5–3 seconds, 30 knots. I'll trim her out a little, 35 knots, but I've come right off the throttles. I could easily cruise right through to the 39 knot top end in very short order indeed. Now, that's not something you of course expect for the reasons I've outlined. And if I trim her in a little bit again, I'm going to turn her to starboard, you'll see that she handles a bit too. So we sweep round, there's lots of grip, a decent bit of heel, and as we come back onto the straight, as you'll witness just now, well, there it is. It doesn't exactly snap back into the proper running attitude like a non-fly model might, but it's certainly not ponderous, it's certainly not slow. You don't have to wait for it to regain that proper trim. Now, one thing you might expect to have to do with this boat, of course, is use this. Now, that's your zip weight system. With all that windage up top, you'd think, well, you have to combat the winds a little bit. Well, there's not a lot of wind about today. We've had a really good play, and all we've needed is a little notch here or there. And as I say, as you're pushing through onto the plane and accelerating, that's when I really expected to have to use this. So I'd have to drop the tabs just to stop that nose from elevating, for the bow from lifting. None of that at all. I mean, we have accelerated with those tabs down, and again, it's tremendous, really flat, really quick, and then you just lift them once you're on the plane and off you go. But it really does, right from the outset, prove itself to be a much, much better driver's boat than you would expect, I have to say. If we come right back off the plane into displacement mode like this, there's a couple of other traits that I want to talk about that are particularly user-friendly with this boat. Now, it's got a pretty generous beam, 12'6", which is about just in excess of 30% of the overall length. So you don't necessarily expect the tracking at these speeds to be very dependable. Quite often with these boats, you find yourself correcting and overcorrecting and then zigzagging down the channel. But here, the directional tracking at low speeds is really impressive, really stable. If you then get yourself up onto the plane, which I'll do now. Well, again, you find that it's got quite good manners with a low speed plane. I mean, at the moment we're doing 20 knots. If I ease that back, we find that we can quite easily plane at about 16 knots with a perfectly decent running attitude. And again, we don't really have to touch those tabs, but if you like, you can drop the tabs and take that planing speed just down a little lower while keeping your attitude just right. So that's very attractive indeed. And when we get a right up to pace, the running efficiency looks decent too. Now, we've got those triple 300s on the transom, so you know you're going to be burning a decent bit of fuel. And as I say, this is a 41-foot boat, weighs in excess of 10 tons all in. But between 14 and 27 knots, which is what I'm doing now, we're only burning a combined total of 5 litres per nautical mile. And yes, it does go south above those speeds, right up to the 39 knot top end. But given that we've got twin tanks totaling nearly 1,200 litres, that gives you a really, really useful range for a proper dedicated cruise. Now, because we got those triple Yamaha F300s on the transom, we got drive-by-wire steering, and that is a really useful asset because you can program in the amount of resistance you want in the steering wheel. You can also program in the number of turns you want lock to lock. So we've got it arranged so that in the marina, when you're close quarters manoeuvring, it's just 3 turns lock to lock. When you're out and you need extra sensitivity and control at pace, well, 5 turns lock to lock. So that makes loads of sense. And if we come over here and look at the throttles, there are a couple of things to talk about here. Now, we have 3 engines, of course, but we have 2 levers. And it's very simple and intuitive to use. So basically, when the 2 levers are together, the 3 engines are synced. So when you go forward, like so, all 3 engines operate in unison. If, like me, you sometimes prefer to split the throttles when you want to spin the boat instead of using your joystick, then the middle engine is taken out of the equation and you use the 2 outboard engines. You can also, interestingly enough, simply press this button and use the centre engine instead of the 2 outboard engines, and then you can trim the 2 side engines right out by moving that aft bench forward so they're not dragging in the water, and just use that centre engine just to pootle along at displacement speeds. I'm not sure you would if you just bought a £500,000 boat, but that option is there. And then equally interestingly, we have this button. Now, just as we have 2 throttles, well, we have 2 fuel tanks, but 3 engines. So basically that centre engine will take fuel from either of those 2 fuel tanks, and this is the means by which you switch its feed from one to the other if one tank is fuller than the other or if one is lower than the other, just so you can equalise those tanks and make sure that the boat is nice and balanced. One more thing I need to talk about before I step away from this helm station is the lower helm station itself, because so many designers kind of design their Flybridge cruisers with the Mediterranean in mind, so you get lavished with loads of space, loads of facilities up top, but the lower helm is little more than an afterthought. Well, this is absolutely not that. There's a lovely big bolstered seat here which rotates to face the rest of the people at that port dinette. We've got a nice big platform here. Right enough, the guys down here haven't actually spec'd any electronics for this boat because they want to leave that to the preference of the customer. And we've got a huge skipper's side door here, really, really big, to access that larger starboard side deck. Plus the joystick control just here exactly where you need it. And visibility is good too. So many Flybridge cruisers, the roofline comes down too low and visibility is very much compromised. But here, even though the deck level drops away aft, we've got really decent visibility all round. It's about as good as I've seen on a boat of this size and this type. So far so good then, but really what this Merry Fisher flagship is all about is not the drive, it's the space management, it's versatility of application, and that careful space management starts the very moment you step on at the aft end. Now, of course, we have those 3 outboard engines, so there's only room for a small swim platform on either side. Now, the shore power is on the port side, which is useful, of course, because the starboard side is your sole point of access to this cockpit. When we get in here, you see this huge aft bench takes advantage of the fact that we can only get in at the starboard side. It goes all the way across to the port side and wraps around a kind of L shape, a long L shape. And the really enjoyable thing about this is, if we look down at these runners, this little groove in the floor, this entire bench, it occupies the space above the engine well. There's only perhaps a fist and a bit different distance, I should say, between the aft moulding here and the leading edge of the cowling. Again, great use of space, but of course when you slide it forward to this point, very easily done with a couple of catches, you can then trim those engines right out. So that makes loads of sense. This also makes loads of sense. This comes as standard, a drop-down bulwark, so you can really extend this cockpit space. Now, if I come over here to the ladder, you'll see that again, this aims to maximise use of space. It's very steep. And I think if you're particularly frail or elderly, you might struggle to get up and down there. But the reason it's so steep is because they don't want a shallow angle that steals the space back here in the cockpit. And the handy thing is that you can also unscrew this with this knob at the bottom and then pop it into this little guide, so it sits flush with the aft end of this pilot house, and then we have a nice little storage space beneath there. And we'll come to those storage spaces in a second, because you can also see on the port side that the Jeanneau designers, well, they've compensated for the absence of an access point on the port side by fitting a port side gate, so you can get out onto the pontoon that way. And as you can see here, again, really clever use of space. The entire structure is offset to port. It's a very narrow walkway on the port side here, so that we've got a much broader walkway on the starboard side, and that of course is the one that everyone will favour for seamanship duties. Now let's get under this hatch here, because one of the key things you want to see when a boat like this, which quite traditionally would come with inboard engines, uses outboard engines instead, well, you need to see that they really thought about how to best use the space that's vacated by those inboard engines. And I reckon this is pretty impressive. Now if we step down in here, and you can literally step down in here, there's a huge space. But on some boats a lot more expensive than this one, you'd find yourself down in the depths of the hull, messing around with the stringers where you don't really want to put your baggage. Well, here, this is properly lined, a really good usable space. They've taken great advantage of it. And on either side here, we have a pair of fuel tanks, each of them just under 600 litres in size, and we have access to the tops of those through here too. So that is very useful. We also have this, the ladder, which goes on that fold down bulwark on the starboard side. And if I just jump out of there and close this up, we'll head round that starboard side deck, because it's far and away the preferable choice, and take a look at the bow space, because the bow space is also very impressive indeed. Now as we do this, we've got nice elevated rails, so we can feel pretty secure as we make our way forward. And when we get up here, you realise just how beamy this bow space is. It's barely a 4-peak at all, it's so squared off. Now as you can see, we've got a trio of sun loungers here facing forward with their own armrests. They're very comfortable, and they face across to another couple of cushions on either side of that permanent anchor that's rigged right there in the centre. So you could easily fit a table in here with this bracket and seat perhaps 6 people for a nice meal, separated from the social zones at the aft end and up on the Flybridge. And what's really good is the fact that even though you have all that capacity for a nice intimate lunch party, you've still got these hatches to admit lots of extra light down below in the cabins without getting covered up by these cushions. Now of course, generous outdoor spaces are a lot of fun, but these days people want them to integrate properly with the indoor spaces, so it's good to see that Jeanneau's designers have really worked that pretty hard. If we slide this door across, I have to step inside for this one, we'll slide this across too, all the way through like that. Now these do rattle around a little bit, they were a bit loose as we were underway, but that'll be fixed, I have no doubt. And the basic principle is very good if I get rid of this curtain, which actually I find quite aggravating. We see blinds in here which are much cleaner and more modern, and this flapping about at exactly the point where you want that inside-outside integration. Doesn't work for me at all, so I find that quite upsetting actually. But what we do have here is a little fold-out bar to breach that threshold between the inside and outside spaces, and a nice little intimate wrap-around galley. It's quite a cool space. It's got everything you want, nothing you don't. We basically have a couple of gas rings here. Of course you can have electric hob as well. We've also got, this is quite cool, a nice deep ice box for your cold beers and so on, and your wine. We've got a pair of fridges here, which is very practical. And we've also got some high level storage plus the Fusion stereo remote up there. And some good bits of storage down below as well. Some funny shaped storage too, not these things like this. I'm not entirely sure what this is for. Spices perhaps. But you certainly can't knock the quantity and variety of storage there. And rather cleverly, they've kept the companionway nice and open here, and they've relegated all the refrigeration duties over to the starboard side over here. So this is the uprated 2-drawer 144 litre fridge. That's an option, but that's pretty cool. We've got a couple of these little brackets which look, well, they don't look quite up to the job, but they do a fantastic job of keeping these things shut underway. Very simplistic and very effective. And a couple of big slide out fridges there. We also got storage in here full of bits and bobs for the boat, and we have an additional locker over here. Now all of this is largely unused, and although a wine fridge is not specifically on the options list, I've seen one with a wine fridge. It works really well, and of course an ice maker wouldn't hurt in here either, would it? So there's plenty of flexibility built in, and you get all these facilities without actually obscuring your view. As I say, these high level storage boxes, the fact that they're white helps. They don't feel oppressive in any way. They don't kind of hem you in. And as we move forward, we step up a level, and that is another useful feature. It obviously factors in extra space down below, but it also means that when you take a seat at this big port dinette, which I reckon is big enough for perhaps 6 people, you get fantastic views all round. Really impressive. Plus opening windows built in there. You can also drop this table into the space. We don't have the infills on this boat yet, but I'm sure we will do, because it's a useful feature. It means that in addition to the 3 bedrooms for 6 people down below, you can rig this as another double berth and sleep 8 people on this boat, which is quite impressive, I have to say. Now you look forward to that, and it's reasonable to assume in the past that this would be a chart table, but these are very different times. So here we have a little storage box, and here we have a TV bracket. No need for a chart table at all, so you can drift into danger while watching Netflix, which is absolutely perfect. What's not to love about that? Nicely placed so that everyone at the dinette can watch TV. And then on the starboard side, where the helm station sits, now I've mentioned this rotating helm seat, but it's a really useful, thoughtful little device. Now, if I lock that into place and perch myself up there, it is faintly odd, because I'm about 1.5 foot higher than everybody else down there at that port dinette. And there's no possibility of a foot brace for me, because again, underneath we've got storage here. But it's a worthwhile feature. You'd rather have it than not. Given the beam forward design of this Merry Fisher hull, it's reasonable to expect some pretty good things down below. And what I'm seeing here absolutely bears that out. Now, as you'd expect, we've got the owner's cabin up in the V of the bow with ensuite facilities on the starboard side. And those starboard ensuite facilities, they're relatively long compared to the day heads on the port side, which is relatively short. So of these 2 cabins here, the port cabin has by far greater length than the starboard cabin. So we'll pop in there first and see what we see. Now the first thing, of course, is some decent storage. Again, using every square inch. You see the angle of the hull sides there. We've also got some pretty good headroom here for changing, plus a little seat there for the same, just beneath that moulding up top by the port dinette. And if I pop myself down here, well, this, I have to say, is really impressive. It's so much more than you expect. It's nothing like a kind of letter slot cuddy cabin. This is a proper cabin where there's sufficient headroom here beneath that dinette to really sit and relax. There's lovely views through this big window plus an opening porthole, a big mirror, ambient lighting, really nice environment. And in terms of the bed length, well, if I pop my feet at that end, I've got a good 6 inches, I'd say, above the 6 foot mark, so that's pretty generous. And we also have infills that we can pop in the centre here to turn this twin into a lovely big double. So let's pop over to the starboard side now and see how compromised that twin cabin is by comparison. Now on our way in, yeah, it's smaller, but you still get plenty of headroom beneath that Helm console, plus decent access to the wiring on the back of the dash, and another bit of hanging storage there, plus another changing seat. And if I nip down below here, head aft, well, again, this is pretty impressive. Really decent headroom, not as generous as it is on the other side, but perfectly decent. Again, the mirror, again the ambient lighting, again a really good window. And in terms of the length of this particular bed, well, I reckon we've only lost 2 or 3 inches over the length of the beds on the port side, so that's a bit of a triumph as well. But what we really want to see, of course, if you're interested in buying this boat, is not the space you give to your guests, it's the space you get for yourself. And I have to say I'm quite impressed with this. It's quite a low level bed, but if I lift that up, that's easily done with one hand. Again, lots of easy access storage in there. And even though it's quite low down, you still feel that beam forward design, even in this part of the hull. I mean, you can make your way forward on both sides of the bed, and there's only really a taper right at the very head end. What I also like is the fact that we got a lovely big letter slot window out onto that foredeck for loads of natural light. Beneath this section of the bed, of course, we have the bow thruster with 2 batteries, because it's obviously quite a large boat to manoeuvre, and nice panoramic windows. We have a lot of high level storage as well, but that doesn't really get in your face, rather like up in the galley. It feels quite subtle, it feels very open, very impressive indeed. And in addition to this lot, of course, we have extra storage on both sides, again hanging storage on the port side and smaller compartmentalised storage on the starboard side. And let's just squeeze past you there and take a look into these ensuite facilities on that starboard side that we mentioned. So this is, I think, a first on a Merry Fisher, a separate shower compartment for the owner's ensuite facilities. And nothing too plush in here, it's all relatively basic, but the footprint is decent. You've got a little seat to sit down there, plus a window. And forward of that, we have the toilet tucked neatly on the angle behind the door, plus a good size of sink, and again high level storage, again with mirrors. So they really have tried hard to make the light in this boat bounce around, keep it open and fresh, and it really does work. Again, this is all really positive, but on a Flybridge cruiser, particularly a very compact Flybridge cruiser, what you really want to see is the top deck. So we'll head up there right now. Now they are steep stairs, as I say, no doubt about that. But it's interesting when you get up here, because it's not a massive Flybridge with that big expansive foredeck, and the fact that it stops a little bit short above that cockpit. I reckon it encompasses less than half the overall length by some distance. But they do, again, pack a lot into that. I'll move my way forward here to the helm. As you'd expect, you've got everything that you get down below. You've got your bow thruster, you've got your zip weight control, you've got your joysticks, your throttles, space for a 12-inch plotter here as well. And ahead of the helm station, and I like this because this makes it feel just a bit more sociable if you're the guy who's required to drive the boat, we've got a nice sun pad, big enough for 2 or 3 people, I would say. Now, after that, we do have a C-shaped seating area, another really usable dinette, and you can reverse this backrest, push this over, just to chop a little bit from that dinette and add a little bit to this sunbed. There's an infill, again, we don't have that available to us here today. You can pop in here, so this entire L-shaped section creates a wraparound sunbed, sort of orbiting the Helm station. But as down below, what I really like up here is the fact that if I come over to the Helm seat, I should be able to, yeah, rotate this. So that even if I've, you know, we've got good numbers on board and there's no space at that dinette, I can sit here, and up here, unlike down below, I'm at the same level as the guys on that dinette, so it's a really, really sociable place to be. We also have a decent little wet bar at the aft end here, just by the steps and just by the back end of this dinette. We've got a very compact sink, we've got a good size of electric griddle, and we also have an optional pull-out fridge down below. So yeah, I mean, this Flybridge, it's not huge, but it does everything you need it to do. It's got the lounge seats, the sunbathing areas, it's got the dining areas, it's got the wet bar so you don't have to head below to get your cold drinks. Now lower down in the Merry Fisher range, the 1095, that's available with a fly or without one. So far, this flagship 1295 is only available with the fly, but I see no reason at all why you would want to diminish the package by requesting this boat without it. Now it's quite interesting to note that there's actually very little in the way of natural competition for this boat. I mean, you could talk about Galley, and in particular the 400 Fly, and it's a very good boat, but it occupies a higher price bracket than this by quite some distance. You could talk about Regal as well, but they don't actually do a lot of business in the UK these days. And I guess it's quite natural that there's not much competition for this boat because it squeezes such an enormous amount into a limited length of hull. I mean, you've got all these outdoor spaces. You've got sleeping for 6 down below, an additional 2 in that pilot house. And then, in spite of my expectations, or rather lack thereof, the driving experience is really impressive too. Despite all the weight up top of that Flybridge, despite the offset pilot house, despite the fact that we got a ton of outboards way aft on that transom, and despite the fact we got this real beam forward bow, none of that suggests that you're going to have a great day on the water from a helming perspective, but it's a genuinely enjoyable boat to drive, all of which leads me to go a little bit further, and I'll get some contentious feedback for this and suggest that this boat is actually remarkably affordable, because in the modern market context, given what it offers, given this versatility of application, I genuinely believe that this represents great value for money. Now, there might be a boat out there at 40 feet that does more than this, but if there is, I'd struggle to pick it out.